Welcome to Class 4, Fall 2022, Copeland School of Music, Film Scoring. I went over the assignments last week, and in general, I was happy with them, but there were a couple of things that I want to continue discussing with you today before we go on with today's class. Or just when you've got a chord, try to avoid the root note of the chord in the melody. You can have it in passing, that's not a problem. But I just find that if you want to create interest, it's good to start experimenting around with different tones over a chord, right? So if I go to, let's see, if I go to this mode here, right? So if I'm playing in the key of C, right? And actually, maybe it's easier if we do this. And I'll just put myself in the corner there. All right, so you can see my keyboard there, right? So if I've got a melody that goes like this, and I'm in the key of C, right? So it's easy for you to visualize. And I do something like this. Right? This doesn't want to go anywhere. You want to end up there, right? But if we start by right, I did play a C, but I was going in passing. And so these are just a few things. Now, one of you did something really interesting, and you had a melody that was in D minor, and you wrote something like this. And then you went up to an E minor chord with an F sharp in it. And I thought that the second one was really great, but it would have been nicer had you, and I made this remark to the person in the feedback video, if you started on a different tone on that first note. So you could just experiment around with different starting notes, because she had a really nice rhythmic phrase that was memorable. So let's say, for example, we started on an E. That works, right? Because the E is one tone higher than the D, and the F sharp is one tone higher than the E. But then it becomes like almost an exact transposition. So maybe you could try. And I'm playing the D now, but I don't have a D chord in the left hand. So just experiment around with not emphasizing the tonic so much in the music that you write. Some of you that are more experienced, you're doing that, and I would just strongly urge you avoid that. Tonotonia, that's a disease. Okay, so if we look at the syllabus today, we're going to look at something called Motivic composing and why it's so important in films. So we started talking about this a little bit last week, what a motive is, right? Some of the great motivic composers, in my opinion, of all time would be Bach would be one, right? Brahms is very good at that. Thelonious Monk, incredible. He's probably the best, like one of the greatest jazz motivic composers. Duke Ellington, right? I mean, Thelonious Monk, I played this for you last week. And then, right, so he takes that. Duke Ellington would be, or if he did. Right, so you can hear that it's like it's got all the elements there. Duke Ellington, right, if you take Prelude to a Kiss, which we're going to go over. It's just a chromatic scale that gets filled in, and then he transposes it down. Or so can anybody just tell me what the effect of having something as motivic as some of those last examples does to you, right? Like, just name some elements. What does it make easier to do?
You can remember the theme.
Correct, right? And the most important aspect of music from my perspective is rhythm. But the thing that people remember is melody, right? And your ability to write catchy melodies will have a direct, if you choose to go into this, will have a direct effect on your income. It's so true, because if you take a look at, let's take a look at some of this material here. Actually, let's just do this. So this is, I did this like 7 or 8 years ago, and I haven't updated it. All right. The Christmas song, Chestnuts Roasting on an Open Fire, right? $19 million generated in royalties for the composers, and $38 million total because somebody else owns the publishing. The song by the 50s and 60s artist, pop artist Roy Orbison, Pretty Woman. It's been in films. It's been covered by other people. $20 million. It's been earning between $100,000 and $200,000 a year in royalties 50 years after he wrote it. Santa Claus is Coming to Town. Notice some of these are Christmas songs. What's so unique about Christmas songs? They get played every year at Christmas time ad nauseum until you're sick of them, right? Starting soon, like starting in a few weeks. Stand By Me, Ben E. King made that very popular, and then John Lennon did a version of this, and 27 million. Unchained Melody, 27 million. This is in Yesterday by Paul McCartney, $30 million. The Righteous Brothers recorded this song, You've Lost That Loving Feeling, 32 million. White Christmas tops the cake with 36 million. And Every Breath You Take by Sting, 20 million. Every one of these songs has something in common, right? Christmas song, right? That's like almost like, it's almost like Somewhere with a Rainbow Button. So it has this motive, and then it stays in the key and transposes the whole thing down 3 steps in the key, right? Easily remember. You better watch out, da 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 da. Right? It's got that da 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 da, the rhythmic thing. Santa Claus Comes to Town. Every Breath You Take. Whatever it is, right? But it's got that. It's so funny because that melody has been in 5 million songs, but it's the way that he said it and the way he sings it and the way that everything is presented. And then P. Diddy comes along and puts it in one of his songs, and 30 years later, it's a big hit. 20, 30 years later, it's a huge hit again, right? So that's the thing about creating intellectual property, is that a song can be recorded by other people. And it's a wonderful thing. It also, the thing that's great about it is that it can be useful to many generations. I was watching this video the other day on YouTube, and do you realize the band Queen, that was big when I was in high school and undergraduate school? They were huge, right? They're like one of the biggest streaming artists on Spotify now, right? Freddie Mercury's been dead since 1990, something like that. But because their songs are so catchy, great melodies, right? Sung by a great singer. So, the thing about film music is that it's an art, but it's commercial art, the merging of art and commerce, right? You want the films right now are very expensive to make. Even low budget films cost money. And it's the goal of the entire crew that's making the film, the production, the producers, whoever the big company is that's putting it out. Let's say it's Disney, is they want to put out something that's going to recoup their investment. And part of that recoupment up until COVID was getting seats, fannies in the seats at movie theaters, right? I guess that's slowly coming back. But the other part is royalties based upon soundtrack. Soundtrack gets played, songs from the soundtrack get covered. And so that's a big part of the commerce of making films. And you can't really separate the two in 2022, right? That all has to be there. This also extends to an area that I'm intimately familiar with, is television theme music, right? Television theme music, what does it do? It brands the show, whatever that show is. And you remember, you hear that theme song, right? Like the Big Bang Theory, whatever that television sitcom was that was incredibly popular. When you hear that song by They Might As Well Be Giants, Game of Thrones has a good one. Yeah, I don't really know that one, Adrian. I really have to check that out. They brand it. When you listen to... you think football, because that's been the NFL on Fox since 1991 or something like that, Yeah, and we'll look at a few theme songs from those kinds of things. All right, so that's the importance of doing these things, and it's my position that the methods may be different now than they were 10 or 15 years ago. But the way to generate income as a creative artist is to create something that has value in the marketplace and get it into the marketplace. So I'm going to speak from my own personal experience. And some of you know some of this, but I spent, I graduated in 1982 from Queens College, and I had spent since I was 16 playing in bar bands on Long Island, right? I played in Queens, I played in Nassau County, Suffolk County. I played in these big clubs called the OBI. I played in, all over. I played out in the Hamptons. It was a much, much, much different scene back then. The cost of a house was minuscule compared to now. And there were people that actually were able to live just by playing in clubs at night. They were making $50, $60, $70 a night in clubs. And then on the weekends, they were playing weddings and making a couple of $100 each. And that doesn't sound like a lot today, because to be honest with you, I have friends who are playing in bars today, 40 years later, and they're not making much more money than that $50, $60, $75 a night. But everything else has gotten much more expensive. But they could pay their bills. Health insurance was much cheaper. Gas was 70, 80 cents a gallon. The world was much cheaper back then. But then once I got out of Queens College, I started immediately working on shows in New York City, like just within a few months. Actually, the Thanksgiving of this year will be like sort of my 40-year anniversary of the first time I played a show, when I started subbing at the original Little Shop of Horrors off-Broadway show in the East Village. It'll be 40 years in just like another 6 or 7 weeks, which is like frightening to think about how fast that time went. So that whole time from, let's say, 1976 or so until 1998, all I did was play piano for a living. And if I wasn't working, I wasn't earning. So, but Little Shop of Horrors closed in 1987, and I started subbing there for a year. I worked often, and then I got offered the position of playing the keyboard book there, and then I started subbing within a year on the playing piano and conducting the show, and then eventually I took over the show, being the music director and the conductor of the show for the last 2.5 years of the run. So the show closed, and one day I was the music director of this big hit show, and the next day I was just another unemployed musician, and I was collecting unemployment, and I was living in Prospect Heights in Brooklyn, and I started thinking about this then, like how do you sustain your life as a performing artist or as just a musician? And at that point, I started reading articles in magazines about Paul McCartney and how he gathered his fortune. And it wasn't really about being in the Beatles. That gave him a start, and that gave him a ton of money. I don't want to dispute that. But what really started making him money was that in the early 70s and late 60s, he took the money that he earned from the Beatles, and instead of it investing it in the stock market or in some, loony ventures that would end up losing money, he started buying up publishing catalogs. And one of the first publishing catalogs that he bought was all of Buddy Holly's music, because that was one of his idols. So he started doing this before anybody knew the value of this stuff. But his father-in-law was a lawyer in New York City, and I think his father-in-law convinced him to start doing this stuff. So that, like, if you go to see a production of Grease, Paul McCartney owns the publishing to that. He gets money. If you go see a production of Anything Goes, Paul McCartney owns the publishing to that. He gets money. Every time those shows are put on in a community theater or on Broadway, or they make a movie out of it, Paul McCartney gets paid for that, and he's not gigging, right? He's just got these things out there, and they're kind of like his fleet of taxi cabs, right? And owns the fleet. So fast forward to like the late 90s, I was starting to get sick of playing piano in shows, because it had been about 18 years, and I did not want to be a conductor, so I was sort of stuck with nowhere to go. I could be a keyboard player and just go from show to show and lose my mind, because playing somebody else's music, playing in a loud pit, playing music that I didn't think was very good. I was in Miss Saigon for the entire 10 years of the run. And after about 2 years of playing that music, I was ready to commit suicide. It was so depressing. It was so difficult to play. And to be honest, there were some beautiful songs in that show, but a lot of it was really poorly written. And it was incredibly loud. And it was, just a lot of notes to play on the keyboard every night. And it was just a lot of responsibility. So I had started working. I spent like 15 years learning technology and working on my writing. I went back, I got my master's degree from Queens and in composing, and I started getting better as a composer. And then preparation, success is partially luck, but success is where like preparation meets opportunity. So I had done all this preparation, and I've been sequencing and recording stuff and writing my own like jazz-based tunes and recording that and doing that. But I hadn't really done any professional writing gigs. So, I remember one day I was walking down the street between shows at Miss Saigon on 8th Avenue, or was it 9th Avenue? I think it was 9th Avenue, because I was going to this get some food at a place I liked. And I ran into this guy named John Siegler, and John was a sub bass player at Little Shop of Horrors. And he was a very successful bass player. He played with Hall & Oates. He played with Tina Turner. He recorded with Mick Jagger, with Jeff Beck, with Meatloaf. I mean, he was in the original Todd Rundgren and Utopia, that you guys probably don't know who that is. But Todd was very successful in the 70s. And if you go to a sporting event, they play that I Just Want to Bang on the Drum All Day song of his. So John was a very successful studio and touring bass player, but then he started having kids, and he started realizing he couldn't be going out on tour for 2 or 3 months and leaving his wife with the kids and everything. So he sort of had one of the guys that he was doing sessions with was a jingle writer And he started working with that guy and getting opportunities to write TV advertisement. And then he shared a studio with another company called NJJ, and NJJ was the company that wrote the NFL on Fox, and that was before I knew them. So I ran into John in the street, and he said, "Hey, what are you doing? Are you still working on your technology? I know you were recording before." I said, "Yeah, I've got a computer set up, and I work out of the apartment." He goes, "Well, I know this guy at NJJ who shares a studio with us, and he's got this job writing promo music for Fox TV and then for Fox Sports." And he said, "Why don't you come and come down and meet everybody and start submitting stuff?" So that started everything, right? I started producing tracks, and I didn't get my mixing chops together. So I had to work with another friend of mine who mixed things for me. But I started working and getting music on air. And then after about 3 or 4 years of doing this, I started getting royalty checks every 13 weeks from BMI. And then they were, small at first, but after I just kept at it and I kept on working, and more opportunities came my way to write music, to get it on air. And eventually I ran into this situation where I was able to write a bunch of theme songs for sporting shows. I wrote, in the course of like 3 years, I wrote between 40 and 50 for the Big Ten Network, for the Madison Square Garden Network, for Fox Sports, for ESPN, for SNY in New York, and probably some others, Comcast Sportsnet, which is now NBC. And once these things got on the air, by about 14, 15 years ago, I was getting well into six figures in BMI money every year, which meant that I didn't even have to work, right? So these things, I was still playing shows. I was working at shows like part-time. I was doing all this work, and then I started teaching. So I was doing like 3 or 4, sometimes 5 or 6 jobs at a time. And that's another story to talk about. But the thing is that if I didn't have work for a couple of weeks, I didn't worry about it, because I had all this stuff getting on air and generating royalties. And one of the things that helped me with writing these theme songs was the ability to write catchy melodies, right? And understanding how to construct those things. So the same thing with a film, right? The Star Trek, when you hear the Star Trek theme, right? Or the 4-note dee da dee da bum ba bum ba 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 bum, that bit there, you're transported into space. Or if you hear the like the Indiana Jones theme, like all these movies that have franchises where there's multiple episodes, these themes brand that, and they sort of help the audience be transported into the film. And they all use motivic composing, which is the topic of today's lesson. All right. So, yeah. Any questions on that so far? Here we go. All right. Oh, yeah, Irene, it's a beautiful song. I wish I wrote it. so, so this is Honor, main title theme from the HBO miniseries The Pacific, right? So I believe this has to do with World War II and the Pacific front, and they tried to portray the American soldiers a certain way. And so name a couple of adjectives. Don't try to describe this with musical terms, but a few adjectives to describe this music, like one-word adjectives.
Powerful.
Okay. How does it, right? That's one word. Stately, right? It's stately. And it's got this really interesting combination of being inspirational and reflective at the same time. Right? So what happens in war? You get tales of heroism and unbelievable horror at the same time. People die. So he managed to capture that in this. And the way that it's inspirational, one of the things that's very simple, right? And I've had clients actually tell me this, is that if you look at the main melody, which starts right here, right? It's generally ascending, right? If I just made a fragment of the melody, it's going up, much of it. It's as simple as that. Now, the other thing I wanted to tell you here is that we're in the key of D flat, and he's starting on the dreaded D flat, right? So, Lucas, can you tell me how he gets away with that based on what we talked about earlier today?
It's a passing tone,
Well,
almost.
what's the chord?
Oh, is it not the tonic chord?
Right, it's the sixth chord. It's a B flat minor chord. Right, so that's how he gets away with it, right? He doesn't go, that's horrible. Much better. He's got those parallel tenths in the outer voices. It works really beautifully. So that's one thing, right? And then he's got this other little bit too here, which is very, very catchy. Right? And that's a little rhythmic motive that comes in. It comes in various spots, and it's also played as a counter melody against the more sweeping grand melody in a few of the spots, right? He was able to work that in, which is very clever, very, very cleverly done. And then the other thing that he does with this that's very interesting and that gives it that sweep and that uplifting and bit is that it starts off sparse. And then remember last week I talked about the arch structure, and it constantly is growing and getting bigger and more stuff is being layered. And it's not just that it's getting denser with more instruments, it's that the pitch register is stretched out too. So he may start off with something like this, like where the notes are only a tenth from here apart. But then later on, there might be something, right, where it's much wider and things are filled in, right? And that's part of orchestration. And we're going to go over orchestration using a Bernard Hermann cue later on in the class. But this is where you will get into orchestration. I've been making you write things for piano, simply because I want your basic foundational ideas to be as pure and as high quality as possible. So if we just take a look at this tune, and I would just play it very simply on the piano. Not even as complicated as what they've got written here. Right? It works. It doesn't need fancy orchestrations. It doesn't need, like all sorts of gimmicks and sound design and the latest synthesizer and latest sample libraries. The basic core and foundation of this track works. Now, don't get me wrong. We're going to listen to scores later on in the semester that are all electronic, where it's all textures and sounds and that kind of a thing. But this is very important what we're going over here. This film scoring isn't one thing, but there are some fundamental ideas about scoring to picture and learning the language of film music that I think are encapsulated in some of the stuff that we're going over today. All right, so that's that. I love that track. Let's take a listen to an older song. And this is from the 40s, and I typically don't go over music. The earliest music that I go over was that East of Eden, and that was the early 50s, because that's when I think really the great film scoring starts. But this was written by a man named David Raksin, who's an excellent composer. And, let's get the... I don't have the sheet music for this. All right, we'll just listen to it. I pretty much know some of this song a little bit anyway. So this sounds very old. All right, this is recorded. This is probably taken off the master film, so it's not even off of a reel-to-reel recording at the recording session. So this movie Laura is a film noir about a private investigator who's trying to find out the story of this woman, Laura. And basically, 80% of the score has the melodic content from this opening theme. Okay, so that song has been recorded by many, many people. Anybody who's a jazz major at Queens College over the past 15, 20 years probably knows how to play that song. Charlie Parker recorded it with strings, just people, there's lyrics. Somebody put lyrics to it. It's been sung. So the song... so it starts on the 9th. Right, so it's an A minor chord, and it starts on a B, and then it has this, right? And it just transposes the whole thing down a step. So you could see right there, that's the motive. And so let's just listen to this other cue really quickly. So you could see how that first like 30, 40 seconds was almost like a long introduction, a pedal point in the bass and then all these chords going over the top of it. And then he snuck that melody in and like it was some sort of mid-range brass instrument. I couldn't tell from the recording whether it was a horn or a trombone or something like that. But anyway, it's just that motivic thing. It just puts you right into the mood of this. It's really a good movie. I enjoyed watching that one. Let's move forward. Let's actually get these folders open correctly so I don't have to go back and forth. All right. So Henry Mancini, pride of Pittsburgh. Went to high school with my late mother-in-law, believe it or not. Wrote some really, really, really famous songs. Moon River. He wrote Days of Wine and Roses. These were themes from some of these were themes from movies that became big hits, jazz standards as well. So this, everybody knows this, right? This is the Pink Panther theme. The saxophone is played by a guy named Plaz Johnson. He was a big LA-based musician, a studio musician. He played big band stuff, and he plays incredibly on this. So everybody knows this, but this is ultimate, like, motivic composer. Okay, so again, all this material is up in our class folder online. You should all download this and start listening to this stuff. Get this sound in your ears. So let's just take a look at what he's doing here with the melody. Now, again, I talked about not playing the tonic, right? But let me scroll back out again. Here we go. All right, so the melody starts here, right? All right, so can anybody break that down, what he's doing there? Name one aspect of that little melody that sticks out to you.
He goes up the chord. Like he's spelling out the chord.
Correct. That's excellent. Very good, Lucas. So he's spelling out an E minor chord. And how is he spelling it out? What's he doing? He's approaching each chord tone a half step below or a half step above, right? So he's got this little rhythmic idea, but up. A 16th note pickup into a beat. So the first note is we're in the key of E minor. So if we look here, we've got an E, a G, and right here, a B. So we've got an E minor triad spelled out right there. Right? And so, and he's got just that ba-da, 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 ba-da. So if you look at the first measure, there's less activity there. And then in the second measure, the number of elements there increases, right? It's busier. And then when it goes to that B flat here, the chord changes to a C. It's a C7 chord. So this is typically part of the blues scale, right? The blues scale is a kind of minor scale with like a minor pentatonic, but it's got this added flat fifth or sharp fourth in it. So that's what he does there. And that sort of makes it like slinky, you know? I mean, it's sly, it's kind of whimsical, it's playful, it's a little wacky, it's funny. And that's sort of Inspector Clouseau, you know? He's just, it's just really perfectly cast. All right, so he's got these 2-note phrases that all add up. And then this is sort of the answer to that, right? Okay, great. Let's move on. Michael Kamen unfortunately passed away. I just spoke to him on the phone once. He was one of the great composers of the 1990s and 80s. So this is, let's see. Let's see, where is this? Here we go. Okay. So this is The Prince of Thieves, which is, you know, an adventure movie. And this, I love this. There's a couple of spots in here where I just love the writing he does. It's nothing deep, but it just works so perfectly. And the orchestration is beautiful. Still on the introduction. All right, so let's right. Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. Robin Hood stole from the rich to give to the poor. Ancient, England in the what in the medieval times, Renaissance. So, again, a couple of adjectives about this particular piece of music. Swashbuckling, maybe. I mean, it's not like Jack Sparrow on a boat somewhere, but it's like adventure, right? Like they're going to do crazy things and swoop in off their horses and steal stuff. And maybe there's people that need to be rescued. But it's also got the elements of like this triplet rhythm. I remember when I was playing Les Miserables, there was a bit of the show that, like that kind of a rhythm where it's like almost like where there's like a 2 in a triplet superimposed over a triplet. That works really well for this kind of like conflict and sort of like, I mean, it's not like a war movie. It's supposed to be a feel-good movie, right? He's supposed to be doing good stuff, but it really works well. Okay, so, you know, this is supposed to be inspirational, uplifting, heroic. And again, if you notice, up, right? The melody goes up. And then he's got the hook. Then this part. So, right, this is a common technique where he takes this and then repeats it. And what he does the first time is he gets to a pivot chord, or what we call the cadence, the 5 chord, and instead of resolving it down, like you're in the key of B flat, so he has the F chord, F, right? Instead of going and ending it, he goes up to a G minor chord or a 6 chord, right? So it's a deceptive cadence there. And then he ends it, right? So that's that repetition there. And the first time through, you don't get quite finished, and then you repeat it, and then you finish it. That's a really standard technique. And then there's another thing he does. Let's see, it's somewhere over here. Yeah, so if you listen to the brass is playing the melodic figure. And then a couple things, right? So the high brass is holding onto the long note, and then the lower brass is playing an ascending scale up, right? I'll point it out when it comes up. That was one of them. Right? Okay, and then when he goes that, and then here there's another. So you heard like when he was doing that one bit, you heard like 3 or 4 notes ascending in the brass, right? So just filling in that space with the long notes, and then when he gets we're in a different key now, but you'll hear that he plays that in the brass, and then the next time through, he fills in that long note with some lines in the strings. I don't have a score for this, but just the sheet music. So I'll point it out again. Right. Ba, ba, ba. You hear that in the strings there? So, you know, it's just everything, ba, 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 all these ascending lines. It sort of adds to the emotional content of the music. And I hate to be so like literal with that stuff, but it really is true. You know, you can look at that stuff. Now, let's take a look at something. We looked at this a little bit last week. All right, so this is, right, Psycho, the name says it all. This is like a really, one of the most famous main titles pieces of all time. And there's a reason for it. And Bernard Herrmann, one of the great composers of all time in film. There's actually the score in that. If any of you want to read the score that goes, that actually is the full length of the track. But this is the piano reduction. This is where they decided to stop it. All right. So frenetic, right? Like always driving forward and like almost psychotic, the music, some of this music. Yeah, relentless. That's the word I was looking for. Thank you, Adrian. All right. So, and it's unsettled, a lot of it. So if we take a look at the very first chord, this bit right here, B flat, D flat, F. So that's a B flat minor chord, right? And we're in the key of B flat minor, I believe. Yeah. And he adds this note here, which is a major seventh. So it's a minor chord with a major seventh, right? And so to make it even more unstable, instead of having a B flat in the bass, he has an F in the bass. And that becomes a motive in itself. That came back 3 or 4 times throughout the opening of this. So that's... Then right here, we've got this... And that's over a B flat. And he's just playing around with an A, with an A natural, an F, an A flat, and an E natural or an F flat, right? So he's just taking these 2 major thirds a half step apart, and he's playing around with them. So he's taking these intervals. And, this is typical of the classical composer Bartók. His music has this all over it. If you listen to his string quartets, there's so much of these little intervallic things like that. Now, he does a couple of other things that are really cool too. So right in this area here, right, he's got, sorry. I'm playing the wrong thing. What's wrong with me today? Sorry. He's got this chord here, which is B flat, D flat, and G, which is a diminished triad. And then he does something similar to the beginning here, where he adds a really pungent note to that diminished triad to make it even more dissonant. And that becomes, and then another catchy element right here. Da 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 da. Right, that da 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 da. And that is another salient feature of Motivic composing, is having an easily recognizable rhythmic component to it. Right? Dee da 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 da. Dee da 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 da. Bum ba bum bum ba bum. This one is appropriate for this kind of music. Now, there's one other section here where, after all of this frenetic stuff, he goes into a melody that's just not rhythmically difficult at all. It's, right, and then he changes the chord from that. Right, we're in a different key now. We're in the key of, I believe this is G sharp minor, but he starts. So he's got basically a D sharp minor chord going up to an E minor chord, up in half steps. And the way he's got it voiced and everything, it's very interesting. So those are all the components of this. So in this little prelude, which is the opening of the film, you've got 1, 2, 3. This is something that also could be considered an element 4. You've got 5 different elements that are all motivic, that all work together. And that gives you so much material for your score. So much material. Okay, let's move on. Which one is this? No, that's not the one. I think it's... Yeah, this is a really good one. Whoops. Okay, so this is Jack Sparrow from Pirates of the Caribbean by Hans Zimmer. By the way, for those of you that aren't music majors, right, Hans can barely read music. And he's probably one of the most successful composers of the last 30 years. He can barely read and write music. He does everything inside of Cubase. And he's got a team that helps him with the notation and everything afterwards. And he does a lot of sound design in his music. But he can write very catchy melodies. All right. So there's a couple of things for me to talk about in this, right? And that is leading in to the downbeat. That's like a really important, yes, again, with the upward motion. Did you just write that, Adrian? Yes, exactly. And again, this starts on, we're in D minor, this starts on a D, but it's on beat 3, right? It does, the downbeat over the D chord is an F. And, he's just basically writing a scale here. Right? So that's like the bebop scale. Of when you have the chromatic step in there, seventh and sharp seventh, raised seventh and the natural seventh. So, but what he's doing here is he's phrasing into the downbeat. So if we look at just what's on the downbeat of each measure, right here we've got an F, then a B flat, then a D, then a B, then an F, an A G, and an A. So right? So those are the notes that are on the downbeat. But what he does is, whoops, sorry. Right? So just a little side step into music theory here for a second. When you're in a minor key, like this is in D minor, it's very often used. You can also play a chord that's not in that key. And depending upon how you set it, it works very well. You can have an E flat like a half step above. So if you're in the key of, let's say, F, you can have an F sharp in there. It works very well. Or if you're in the key of B flat minor, you can have a B in there. It works really well. Typically what happens is that the third of the chord is in the lower part. So it's typically like, if I was in D minor, so it'd be D minor over F, then the E flat over G, then it goes back to the cadence there. And that's called a Neapolitan chord, right? It's used a lot by Baroque composers and also classical era, like in early 1800s. So he does that here, right? He gives you that E flat, which is it's cool. And then another thing that he does. So the first line is D, E, F. Let me get so you can see the MIDI keyboard there. There we go. So leading into this measure, we've got the D in the bass. We've got a G and a B flat. So you see that's nice tenths there. And then he does have the D, but he goes right again with the tenths, but now you've got a B natural there, which is out of the key. And then he repeats the opening line again. And instead of having that D in the bass, he's got a B flat in the bass. Then the E flat, right? So when he repeats that little 3-note phrase, he gives you a different chord. That's something also to keep in mind when you're filling these things out, when you're writing pieces. So if you have a melody that goes, you could play this chord under that. You could play all of those chords. Right? You could play. Right. All those chords work over that little melody. And that's up to you guys to learn how to do that stuff in your theory classes or whatever you're taking. All right. So one other thing I wanted to talk about this is production here. So when he comes in the second time, he's got these like more orchestral strings going on in the background playing a rhythm. Right. The first time through, it's very sparse. It's almost like a tango rhythm. Right, it's very sparse. It's just strings and a solo cello the melody is being played by. Here we go. So the second time through, he's got that those triplets going on in the background, and the melody's being doubled by, it sounds like a brass instrument. Oh, what's that? Gee, come on, man. Thing's more flitty than my dog. Okay, here we go. Sorry about that. Yeah. Or maybe more than one horn. And there are some section cellos in there. I can hear them coming in my right ear. But what's right in the middle, and it sounds like it doesn't sound like it blends. It sounds like it sticks out, is the solo cello from the beginning. So I don't know if you could pick that up over the Zoom. Right there, it was really present. Right? It doesn't feel like it's part of the track. It feels like it's separate. Yeah, I don't know if I like that, personally speaking. But that's one of Hans Zimmer's, one of his big things that he's done with film music is that he's taken what sounds like an orchestra and he's sort of changed what we're expecting to hear from an orchestra, right? So let's say you're recording orchestral music and you've got, I don't know, you've got maybe 16 strings and it's broken up between some violins, violas, cellos, and basses. And then you've got you've got a woodwind choir that's one flute, one oboe, one clarinet, and a bassoon. And then you've got maybe three trumpet players, three horns, a couple of trombones, and a bass trombone, right? So what he does is he feels like, I don't know if this is what he thinks, but the effect to me, or what I get out of it, is that he says, hey, these are the sounds, and I'm going to do whatever I can with the sounds to create an alternate experience that goes along with the vision that the director has of the film. So instead of having 24 strings, he may have 120 strings. Right. And he may record them in a way where some of the strings are like set up typically as you would set up a string orchestra with the violins on the left and then the lower instruments on the right. Well, he may change that where he takes the lower instruments and he puts them on the center. And then he may have a second orchestral setup, which is like if you're in a big studio up on the balcony in the back. And so then he's blending all this stuff together, and then he layers that on top of his sampled orchestra. So, you get this sound that is not really possible unless you really like, it's not what we're typically used to hearing, right? There have been some classical composers who have done some work with like in a performance of spatially setting up the instrumentalists in different spots of the hall. Yeah, that's definitely been done before. But when you're combining all these elements together to create like this huge sound sometimes, or this unique sound, and then layering on top of that a solo cello that sounds like it's right in your face, that's very different than what we're typically used to. And then you've got all your sampled orchestra that's even making it sound even bigger. So that's one of his innovations, and it's what's kind of expected today. So let's take a look at another one. Okay, so this, we're not going to, well, maybe we'll listen to this whole thing. But, you know, this is one of the most successful franchises, right? Oh, come on, man. Here we go. Hey, I caught myself before I started playing the music and switched the screen back on. Big improvement. Okay, great. Okay, I want to stop this for a second because something just occurred to me. And I'm glad that I just played that Hans Zimmer. So, okay, this, I can hear that this sort of, I don't know if it was a conscious decision or unconscious, or maybe it's just a stylistic thing, but there is, even though this is in a major key and the Hans Zimmer was in a minor key, there are two things here that are very similar to the Hans Zimmer one, right? The first one is this pickup rhythm. Right? We're in 3/4 in this, in the Jack Sparrow, and this is in 4/4, but then you still get that, right? That line that leads into the downbeat. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is we're in the key of C here, right? He takes that, he has that right here, we're in the key of C and he's got a D flat chord, which is like the Jack Sparrow had the E flat chord in the key of D minor, right? So there's some similarities there that I never, right, flat 2 chord. Thank you, Peter. I never put that together before just now. All right, so this one, again, another one with this unbelievably, so the way you can think of this is it's two people having a conversation. The first person says, the second person says, really? Then they repeat it. And then, oh, I get it. Right? So you see that like the melody sort of has a conversational aspect to it. And he does that by, if we look at the very first thing here, he has this melody that goes with a little jump at the end between this note and this note. So it goes from a C to a G to a C. And then this one here is just, and then he repeats the similar idea and he starts on a different chord tone. And then the other person sort of joins in to finish the conversation, right? So all of this stuff is interesting to me. So, oh. So if you were going to write a melody that has those same kinds of things, you might do something that's like, right? Something like that, where there's a beginning and then there's almost like another person answering the question or making a comment on the melody. So these are other ways to think about organizing a melody, and that's not really the technical thing for it, but it does sort of work. All right, so I just want to play you a little bit of all right, so I use Motivic composing all the time, right? It's very important when you're writing this kind of TV music. So some of you have heard this before. I wrote the FIFA World Cup theme for Fox Sports, which gets aired even in non-FIFA times. And this is a rough score that I took right off the Pro Tools session. I don't have in my possession. I didn't create the sheet music. I handed it off to somebody else. But let's take a look at this. The melody will start here. Here we go, right here. Okay, so this is not the final on-air version. This is my demo, which gives you an idea as to when you guys get into this, the production qualities that you'll need to get in order to work on these things. Okay, so it's all on this line here, the melody. So let me zoom in on that. Right, so sorry. So a lot of the same principles we just went over, right? The ascending melody, there's rhythmic vitality to it. And then, right? So you got a lot of motives in there, dam, ticka dam, ticka da, 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 right? And then the second time through, remember I said you vary things. So let's make this a little softer. So the first time through, I'm outlining a D chord, and I'm breaking my rule. I'm starting on the tonic. And then the second time through, I start on an F sharp. Keep the same rhythmic idea, but play different notes. Repeat that, and then here, instead of doing an exact repetition of this phrase like I did between this measure here and this measure here, right? I just make a little, right? And the whole thing is very recognizable. And, it's one of the great things about doing this kind of work is, when I worked on my graduate thesis, I wrote a string quartet. I spent 4 months to write 8 minutes of music. It got played once. It's never been heard of since. This tune, in 2016, I think, the U.S. women's soccer team, they were playing it in Canada, so it was on a prime time on a Sunday night, the championship game, when the women won, and 30 million people were watching. So, in America, 30 million people heard my track. A few years ago, the last time the women's team was on, because they're incredibly popular, over the course of the 6 weeks, 200 million people watched, and my track was being used all over that. Right? It got something over 6 weeks, something like 5,000 performances on all of the, like on Fox, the on air Channel 5, Fox Sports 1 and 2, and some other networks that they licensed out some of the programming to. So, when you start thinking about like how many people actually hear your music, right? It's one of the great things about this. If you have a smash hit movie that your score is part of, how many people actually hear your music? And it's a great way to, and you're part of telling a story. So it's a great way to have exposure to your stuff. And, I just feel like if you're going to do something, people should hear it. All right. So we're going to move forward, but I want to just go over the assignment for a second for next week. Okay, so I'm going to change this. Instead of 5, I want you guys, you can do 5 if you want, but I want you to compose 3 30-second cues or theme, like main titles in different styles using motives as the basis for the material. And you'll choose from the following categories: drama, adventure, thriller, romance, and comedy. All right, this is 5. This is for when I have graduate students in the class, which we don't today. And again, piano, right? Just a simple piano and some simple accompaniments. I want you to focus in on getting the motives right, getting the melody. And so remember some of the techniques, the ascending line for some of these things, avoiding the tonic. I'm not saying you can't play the root, the basic key tone, but prepare it properly, like we saw with the right, the way that the greats did it. Now, before you start writing drama, write a sentence or of like what the drama is about. Is it scary drama? Is it a wartime drama? Is it crime? Is it like the Godfather, right? What kind of adventure is it? Is it Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, or is it somebody sailing a small boat across the Pacific, a 20-foot sailboat across the Pacific? Yes, just piano and simple accompaniment, like we've been doing. We're going to get into expanding that soon, but I want to start talking right now for the next 40 minutes or so, about 35 minutes, about a topic that I think will be helpful. So you notice that we, with the exception maybe of the Pink Panther theme, every piece of music we listen to is orchestral in nature. That doesn't mean that every film score is orchestral. Dave Grusin, who's a jazz pianist, he was a record producer. He owned GRP Records. which put out a lot of smooth jazz artists in the 80s and 90s. And he's still with us. He's probably pushing 90 now. He scored a Tom Cruise film called The Firm for 2 pianos. It worked perfectly, right? There are you can hear some like jazz big band stuff in some comedies. You can hear some and we're going to go over this film, The Social Network. It's got a piano and a lot of electronics. There's a film called Black Orpheus. It's a Brazilian film. It was very influential. There's a big hit song. Louis Bonfa wrote the score. It's a theme from Black Orpheus. A lot of that is Brazilian percussion music, right? It's like wild, really barbaric rhythms and really just incredible. But it's not an orchestral score at all. But one thing that orchestral music can teach us, right, is about texture and orchestration. So, like, let's say I was going to play an improvised little piano piece for you, right? And I did something like, right? And you see as I played the same riff over and over again. And each time I orchestrated it differently on the piano, right? I started off solo. And then I added a couple of notes, one note. Right? So orchestral music, studying it and listening to it, can teach you how when you play something in a certain pitch register with a certain group of instruments, it has a kind of emotional content. So again, I'll take the same melody. Or that should be an E flat, but if I played it, that's such a different feeling. Or if I'm playing it, or if I change the harmonies. Right. So these are things that orchestral music can teach you that you can apply to any music, right? If you listen to what I consider to be great popular music, you can hear beautiful orchestrations in some of it, and they don't have to be orchestral. They can even be just 2 guitars, bass, and drums. It's the way that the instruments are set at that particular moment in the song. So what I want to do today is we're going to take a look at a very simple cue, and it's very old sounding, by Bernard Herrmann. And this is the actual score. So this is the Vines. And I believe this is in Journey to the Center of the Earth. And I have a piano reduction here, which I'll pop into. Let me just take both of these and pop these into the chat for you, because I don't think this is in the in our class materials. So let's. Okay, great. Actually, let's look at, we can follow along with the score. No, not that. Why is that getting weird on me? Okay, here we go. I'll tell you when the score starts. Actually, it's not quite here yet. Sorry about that. Similar music, though. I guess that was it, and it's a little different. Oh no, hold on, let me just... Okay, this is a few cues all in this one track. I should just edit it out. Here we go. Obviously the cue's a little bit longer than that, but you get the idea of that, right? So let's see. I've got here a Pro Tools session where I sequence this bit. Okay, great. So the music is very simple. It's a major seventh chord, so it's like a E flat, G, B flat, and D. And let's just take a listen to this bit right here. So the first thing is that he is, like, if you listen to those chords here, it sounds very pretty. A different sound when you move it down an octave. And where he's doing it with some of the brass, right there, that's very different. And I'm going to show you what's going on and why this is effective. So right here, the first time here, this is not his orchestration. This is just something I put together with 2 regular flutes, 2 alto flutes, and 2 bass flutes. And that's just a fragment of the cue. Now, if we open up this frequency analyzer, so those of you that have had audio classes with me, you'll know that from left to right is lower pitches or lower frequencies to the higher frequencies, and from bottom to the top is softer to louder, right? So frequency, left to right, and bottom to top is, anybody know the right word for that? Four of you. That make me very disappointed. Amplitude. Right? Remember we went over waveforms in Pro Tools, and the height of the waveform is the amplitude, and the length is the frequency? That's all right. Okay, so let's take a listen to the flutes and see what happens with this. So now there are 4 different pitches being played by those instruments because it's a 4-note chord. And you could see right here, every one of these sharp lines at the yellow where the point is, that's an actual pitch. So let me do that one more time. I want to count how many pitches there are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then a bunch here that are very inaudible. So there's 10 distinct pitches in there. Do you know what those additional pitches are called? Do you remember that when I showed you with the Hammond organ clone? Well, you had the fundamental frequencies and we had the...
Would it be overtones?
Correct. My high school music teacher once said to me before, all of us, before we graduated, if you're going to go to college for music, overtones is the answer to everything. If you don't know what you're talking about, just say overtones. All right. He was a great guy, Walt Schneider. All right. So that's with just those flutes. Now we're going to get here. The first orchestration is for 2 tubas and 4 trombones. That's the first. That's this right here, 2 tubas and 4 trombones. All right, so that's very different, right, than the flute. Let's take a look at the flutes again. See how the flutes have more defined pitches? And these here, you see there are additional pitches there, but it's much, there's like less sharp angles in between them. Now, that's because even though these instruments have more overtones in them than a flute does, I think, therefore I am, they're playing low, very low pitches, so you're hearing a lot of fundamental, and they're playing very soft. So you'll notice that when the sound gets brassier, right, when you're hearing more of the brass, it gets a little brighter. You'll notice that there's more harmonic activity in the sound. See that? When right at that measure there, how it changed? It became a little bit more like the flutes with more, with more harmonic activity, right? You could see those pitches are much more defined. Now, the instruments with the most amount of harmonic content in the orchestra, from my perspective, are double reeds, like oboes and bassoons and stuff like that. English horns. And you see there's the fundamental tones here, but then the overtones up here are much more pronounced. They're just louder. And these are clarinets. Clarinets have a more pure tone, so you'll see more pure tone than they're more like a sine wave than the square sine wave than the winds or the brass. And you see there is some harmonic activity, but it's much gentler, the slope. So that's the bassoons and the winds, the clarinets. So you could see with this, right? The point that I'm trying to get at with this is that, good, Irene, you remember amplitude. The point I'm trying to get at here is your orchestration will have a direct effect on the character and meaning of the music you write. And a lot of the reason for that is the way that their overtones are being spit out by the combinations of instruments you're using, right? So just some things to think about as we start getting into more orchestrating our pieces is that low-pitched instruments, you should avoid having them be too busy unless there's not a lot going on elsewhere, right? The more you practice this and the more you get control over what you're writing, you'll be able to make your lower pitched instruments have more activity. But as you're just getting started with this, I want clear and clean and really easy to follow music, right? Make the emotional content be very direct. And just typically speaking, if I'm going to do something and have like, that's not really busy. It's not playing a lot of notes because it's just doing octave things. But if I'm going to do something like, you can do stuff like that, but then you have to be careful with what's going on above it, right? You have to have just keep it clear and clean. Don't have too many busy elements going on all at once. And again, the more that you get used to doing this, right? It's different than writing a song where you're just writing, that's High Lily, High Low. It's from a 1950s movie, right? That's a song. You guys, I think that some of you are more used to writing songs and trying to write songs. This is different kinds of music, and it requires you to think a little bit differently about the orchestrations with that. All right. So that's a lot of material for today. We didn't watch any film clips today. We'll get back to watching them next week. Yeah, and we'll keep moving forward. Any questions or any comments or any concerns? No, you all have it down? And then you were all, how many people have handed in their assignment or are going to be handing it in today? Because I'll probably be looking at it on Friday, most likely. Great. So, Irene, were you able to get online? I just asked you the question. Did you upload it, Irene?
Hi, Professor. Yes, I did.
All right. So I'll look.
Task if you want.
So I'll look at that one tomorrow, and I'll give you feedback for that.
Okay. Thank you.
So you were able to get online?
No, but I recorded on my phone. I'm probably gonna reset my computer so I can be able to do Logic, use the program more easily. So yeah.
Okay, no problem. Sounds good. You know, if you need to, we have computers that you can sign out. You just have to talk to Justin.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think so. I'll send out an email to you and to him, and then you can talk to him about that. There would be a sign up sheet. You'd have to pick it up at the music library.
Okay, yeah, that'd be cool. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So keep up with your homework and let me know if you've got any questions with this, and we'll continue on next week. That was a lot of information today. Just think about that stuff, and try to apply it to the assignment, right? We went over a bunch of principles that were common to all of those themes, and all of those themes were in very successful film projects. And some of them are hit songs. I mean, how you all know the Pink Panther theme, right? You all know that. Everybody knows that. It's just like it's played in every high school stage band. It's an incredible piece of music. And I hope that you all have the opportunity to write something like that one day and receive the benefits that it will duly bestow upon you. All right, everyone. You have a great day, and I will catch you guys next week. All right.